What's up, guys? Ed Piscor here, and a few weeks back, Jim Rugg and I had the opportunity to speak with the great Warren Bernard. He's the executive director of SPX, the Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland, one of my favorite comic shows. I'll be a guest there this year in September, mid-September. Warren is also very instrumental with bringing comics into the Library of Congress and getting a lot of inclusion with cartoonists in many of the events that they have going on in Washington, D.C., around the Library of Congress and stuff. I was very fortunate enough to be invited to the National Book Festival 2 times, thanks to the contribution of SPX. He's doing a lot of archivist work by getting a lot of small-run independent comics into the Library of Congress, has several printed volumes that highlight and showcase large swaths of forgotten comic book and cartooning history. His collection is massive. I've been to the guy's house and almost like doubled my education in his library. So hope you guys dig the shoot interview. It's a good one. Check it out. Warren Bernard, when I described you as an antiquarian, you took offense to that. How would you describe yourself? Because here's the thing. We have you in front of the camera, and you have many disciplines, man. You're running SPX. You're a curator. You're Eisner-nominated editor for Cartoons for Victory book. Yeah. Super collector. There's a lot of facets to you. I like the antiquarian part because I've never seen so many old books, but like...
Well, you know, the antiquarian, unfortunately, that when one reaches a certain age and certain words are thrown at them, it's you then go, well, is that a reflection of me, or is that a reflection of what it is that I collect? But yeah, I do have a ton of old stuff. There's no question about that. But as you know, having been to my house, I have a ton of new stuff also. So to me, it's just part of a continuum of comics. All right? So I don't view, for instance, I don't view Thomas Nast any different than I view either of you two as creators, okay? To me, they're equally important in the canon of comics. And I don't view multi-page strips versus single-panel strips versus graphic novels. I see no differentiation between them, okay? A lot of people do. They go, oh, I prefer this or I prefer that, and that's fine. I'm not taking anything away from that. I don't view comics that way, which is why my collection is that wide and diverse. Okay, I don't view political cartoonists different than I view the comic strip people. So to me, it's all the same. All right, so it's a definitional thing in my head. Of course, it causes some problems when I have to collect goddamn everything. So
got a big house.
Yeah, right.
and you know what? Like I teased to the audience that Jim and I, after SPS, we're going to visit you on Monday after the show.
Yeah.
And we're going to go through the collection a little bit.
Yeah.
So it would be amazing to just, throughout this interview, we'll talk about some of the stuff that you have.
Yeah, sure.
And however the audience responds, like that might be the first stuff we look at when we give you a
visit. Absolutely. You know, as you know, because you've been, it's big, it's vast, it's multifaceted. It is not any one genre or any one bunch of cartoonists or what have you. I still have the picture I took of Ed. He had never seen the Gothic blimp works before, and I laid them across the floor of my library, and Ed just sat there, and I've got this great photo of Ed just really pensively looking at these things, okay? And he turns to me and says, I never thought I would ever see these. And by the way, that echoed when I had Jaime and Frank over at my house back in 2012. They came over, and Frank had never seen the Gothic blimp works, and I did the same thing with him, and he said the same thing. Now, for someone like me, when you can bring people in to, when I bring people into my house and have these visceral experiences with what's there, okay, that, I mean, if I don't do anything else for the rest of my life, I'm happy, okay, because it's like, oh, these things, people have emotional connections to these things, okay, that I can fortunately give people. Durf came to my house, this is about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was Sunday night after SPX, and I am beat, okay, I am just fucking, you gotta understand it, I am just destroyed, okay, and I'm laying.
Say, we should run a before picture of this, and then one of that Monday after SPX.
I actually had a buddy of mine take one of me that I'm sprawled on the floor of my living room like this, okay? So Matt Bors comes in with Durf in tow, and I'm laying there and I'm barely conscious, and I'm talking with Durf, and you know, I said something about my collection. I go, yeah, I've got copies of The Masses, and The Masses was a socialist magazine with these fabulous illustrators and cartoonists in it that ran from 1912 until the federal government shut down in 1917. And I get up and I go, okay, fine. So I get up and I break out my Masses, and Durf just, I mean, he just had the best time because he thought he would never see any of those copies of those things. So that I love doing that kind of stuff. Okay.
Here's a quick question before we get into the guts of the collection. When you have Garth Ennis at your house, what does he look at?
Garth is a huge World War II fan. Okay, and he has a very deep background on the war. And so I broke out for him, the first thing I broke out was just all the stuff I had that was done in England. Okay, and that was it. And I showed him some stuff from Nazi Germany. But he spent the better part of 5 hours leafing through and I have political cartoon books from World War II and children's books. I've got a really nice collection of children's books, picture books, not the more novelized ones, but the picture books from World War II. And he just went through every page very, very carefully. And we have a really big connection on both World War I and World War II. And that's what he, you know, he's come the one time. I'm hoping to get him down a little later this year to do it again. And but that's what he looks at. And when I opened in fact, how he came to my house, Nick Abadzis came to my house. He was doing a signing over Big Planet Comics. I said, hey, Nick, come on over. And he came over, and I go, you saw my drawers, okay? And I opened my World War II drawer, and he looks down, and he goes, does Garth Ennis know about this? I go, well, I'm afraid I don't know Garth. And Nick introduced me, and I think it took 5 or 6 months, and Nick and Garth came down to my house and spent the night. Garth and I were locked, okay? You know, whenever I go up to New York, we sit down, we have a great dinner. One of the most intelligent conversationalists you'll ever want. I mean, if you want to sit down and talk politics and talk history and things like that, Garth is your guy, you know.
Warren, can you tell us about how you started collecting, or when it became conscious that you were, you know, doing this in more than just a fan kind of, you know, kids that have a box of comics?
Well, there were really two phases, okay? And the first phase was when I was, 13, a little younger than that, was probably about 11 or 12. One of the kids that I was in, I think, 6th or 7th grade with, was selling off his adventure comics at the time, okay? And this is Legion of Superheroes, Death of Pharaoh Lad, okay?
Jim Shooter represent?
Yeah. I love that stuff, all right? So I was like, wow, this stuff's really cool. I think I'll buy this. And then I was probably about 14, and I had been collecting Superman comics. Now, I got hooked on superhero comics when my tonsils were taken out and my parents bought me a comic book, and it was a Superman comic. They didn't know this, but the story in there was the death of Ma and Pa Kent, okay? Which is like, you know, you're a 7-year-old kid and you're reading this, you're going, oh my God, poor Superman. His parents just died, okay? So that started me on Superman, and I bought my first Golden Age comics, I think it was about 1970.
You grew up in New York?
I was born and raised in New York, moved down to Washington, D.C. when I was 14.
So were you a part of the early comic conventions?
No, I was not.
No?
No. I really didn't get into it until I was more into high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
What years thereabouts?
So I went to my first, actually I started out in science fiction conventions, like 1971. And
Phil Seuling conventions? Or?
No. These were local Disclave conventions, and the story behind that is I've got all this pulp knowledge.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason for that is my buddy and I went over to this guy's house who put an ad in the paper about selling comics. So we go over, we buy a bunch of comics. It was Marvel stuff. And my buddy at the time had every single Marvel comic. Now in New York, I'd never seen them. So when I moved down to DC, the DC area, and I met my buddy John, I'd borrow, like, starting with Superman #1, okay? And that's how I started reading the Marvel Universe at the time, because in New York, in my neighborhood, the Marvel comics were not distributed there. You did not see them on the newsstand, okay? So, anyway, where were we going on this? I'm sorry.
Beginning your collection.
Right, beginning my collection. So, I went over to this guy's house, bought some comics, and his father goes, "Hey, you know what pulps are?" We go like, "We don't know what the hell's that." Brings us down to the basement, turns on the lights, and this whole basement is filled with pulps. Okay. Long story short, I started working for him in his basement, helping him fill the orders because he was a pulp dealer. He was also a member of First Fandom, and he's still alive at the age of 99. He's one of only 2 people left that were at the very first World Science Fiction Convention.
So he's butting up against Isaac Asimov or something, or Harlan Ellison?
I had the privilege of meeting Isaac Asimov because I was working at his tables at science fiction conventions.
Wow.
Okay, and I met L. Sprague de Camp, and I met Forrest Ackerman. I mean, this guy knew everybody because all these people had grown up together. So anyway, so I started collecting Golden Age comics. But then when I hit college, and I had some good stuff. I had World's Best #1. I had All Select #1. I had some Marvel Mysteries. I had every Superman 1957 and 1973 and a bunch of Golden Age ones before that.
You're using past tense, had.
Well, that's where I'm getting to.
Okay.
And I had to pay for college, okay? And so all those comics went. And the last one I let go was my Flash collection. I didn't have Flash 105, but I love that Infantino Giella stuff. I just love that. And I basically sold almost my entire comic collection so I could get through college.
That's cool.
A deep regret. Then, when I was in my 20s, I was about 19 or 20 years old, and this wouldn't surprise you, so, I smoked a little weed, and I went into a used bookstore, and they had New Yorker albums, okay? And they all had the dust wrappers on them, so I bought one from 1933. No, I didn't have dust wrappers. Bought one from 1933, and I took it home, and I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this shit's great, okay? And so that there was a horizon expansion.
Yes.
Okay, because I already loved comic books, but also by that point, I was starting to move out of the superhero world, okay, because I'd already been reading superhero comics for 8 or 9 years, and they were losing its thrill for me. So that's when I got into about 72, I got into underground comics, and we used to have to go up to the head shops where they sold the bongs and everything. And there was one place in particular, the Electric Head, that had a black light room. So we would smoke some weed and go up there and it was a room about this big. They had all these amazing fluorescent black light posters with the UV lights in there, and you'd spend 15 minutes just drooling on that stuff. But they all sold underground comics. So we would go up, it was probably a better part of once a month or twice a month, we would go up there and buy that. And then at that same time, when I went to the University of Maryland, I started with the University of Maryland Comic Art Society. And that's where I met Gary Groth and Mike Catron. Okay.
Publishers of Fantagraphics.
Publishers of Fantagraphics, okay. So they were at the University of Maryland the same time I was. So that's how I met all of them. So in terms of my collecting, I then went ahead and, I'd buy whatever I can. I got into some newspaper stuff. I really love the Spirit, and I got some, you've seen my Spirit tabloids, and we should show some of that when you come to my house. But then I got into the corporate world, and my collecting really consisted of me going into the local comic book shop saying, I want these things, and I always went after the signed limited editions of the books, okay? So, as Jungle Book came out, signed limited, I got all that stuff, okay? Which, looking back on it, I'm glad I did.
Who would have published that? Byron Price or somebody?
No, the signed book was Kitchen Sink. Kitchen Sink did a lot of signed numbers. Eclipse did a lot of signed books. So there were publishers out there at that time that were doing, and on a marketing perspective, I don't know who they were marketing to besides me, but it was very unusual to go ahead and put all that labor into editions of between 100 and 1,000, signed with plates, The Rocketeer with Dave Stevens was put out at that time. So I collected all of that stuff. On occasion, I would go and get something out of the comic book world, like, it was about 1983, there was an ad, I'd get the Comic Buyer's Guide. Okay, the newspaper. And there was an ad in there, for sale, half year's Little Nemo in Slumberland. And I was a Winsor McCay fan. I'd always been one. I was like, wow, this is pretty fucking cool. Okay. So that was on a Tuesday. On the Saturday, I was up at this guy's apartment in New York. And on the floor of this itty-bitty New York apartment in Manhattan was a stack on the floor about that big that was every Little Nemo in Slumberland Sunday page. And it was selling them in half years.
And these are from the 1900s.
This is 1905 through 1912.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And you just didn't see this. He got them. What the story he told to me is they were actually the bound volumes from the New York Herald itself. He had actually gotten them. Who knows how? And then he sliced out all the Little Nemo stuff, and I don't know what he did with the rest. And so I got 1905 because I wanted the first one. I couldn't not have the first one. Then I got I didn't get 1906. I got all of 1907 and half of 1908, which includes the Walking Bed. I had to have the Walking Bed. I got Befuddle Hall. I've got the entire sequence. Is an 8-week sequence. Everyone knows the Little Nemo, or most people do, where they're climbing through the city, where they're really big and they're climbing through the city. Well, that's part of an 8-week sequence that when you lay it, like I've laid it out for people at my house, and no one ever sees it that way because they only see the one page, they turn the page, they see another page. But I laid the whole sequence out on the floor, and people are like, holy shit, because the man had a vision. Okay, it's clear when he started, he knew where he was going. Okay, so I got that. I got there was another ad in the Buyer's Guide newspaper of file copies of Mickey Mouse stories, the predecessor to Walt Disney Comics and Stories. So I have a stack of most probably like 20 of these things that are pristine file copies.
This would be the Floyd Gottfriedson strips?
No. This was a magazine that they put out that had puzzles in it, it had comic strips in it, it had single panel cartoons in it, of all of the Disney characters at the time. And so the Mickey Mouse magazine that came out starting, I think it was 1932 or 34. That one ran until, I think, 1940 or 41, and then they changed the number into Walt Disney Comics and Stories, okay? So this was the predecessor of that. And so I got those, and those were exceptions to the rule. And then when I left the corporate world, I started expanding out into, because I had time on my hands. When the job I had, to be real honest with you, I fucking busted my ass, okay? My sister Sharon, after I left the job, she said, Warren, you disappeared for about a decade. Okay. Then it was 2004, I get a phone call. Now, I had accumulated hardback books. I started focusing on, so this is sometime in the early 80s. I said, something, all these people focusing on comic books, and there's too much stuff in comic books. It's an abyss, okay? And all these people were focusing on Sunday pages. That was another abyss. So I decided to go after the books, okay? And you've seen. So I went through and looked at the bibliographies and tracked down all of the cartoon-related books, single-panel and multi-panel cartoon-related books that came out starting just before the turn of the 20th century through basically 1950, and track all of them down. And there are only a small handful I'm missing. I have a nice few hundred Platinum Age books, but with the Platinum Age stuff...
And what's the Platinum Age?
The Platinum Age is basically the era from the start of the comic strip in circa 1900, when they started the big reprint books, to when comic books came in 1933. So that's considered the Platinum Age. And there were a bunch of those people that I really liked, but there were a bunch of those people where I would read it and it was like, I'm sorry, I don't care if this is Platinum Age, I can't read this. And it's not going, it sucks, okay? So I was selective in terms of what it was I got. So I made that as a focus to the collection at that time. So I was building up this book collection, single panel cartoon stuff, multi-panel cartoon stuff. A buddy of mine, Charlie Roberts, and I were talking one day. This is sometime, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And we were talking about how there are books and magazines that have all the specialty art done by all of these great creators that is only in those publications. So I started going after that material. So I've got a pretty extensive collection of magazine articles. For instance, did you know that E.C. Segar was in Better Homes and Gardens, and he did 2 specialty Popeye drawings for the article, and they've got pictures of him and his wife in their garden. Okay, and they talk about how much they love their garden. There is a Popular Mechanics article on E.C. Segar that I didn't know this, and it's not in any of the histories. He was a carpenter and a wood maker. Okay, he was a cabinet maker, and he made his own boat, and he made his own buffet for his. So this guy was doing stuff besides being a cartoonist that requires a very high level of skill. Okay, you should have seen the boat. Okay, look at this picture of the boat. It's like, holy shit! Look at the boat. Look at this stuff. It's not anywhere. So there's all this other stuff that comes up. So I got into collecting that. I'm a big Willard Mullen fan, and in the late '90s, a bunch of his originals they basically deaccessioned the entire Sports Illustrated archives. So there was basically 60 years of baseball and sports histories in terms of cartoon originals that came up on the market. And so I went around and I got, I now have, I think it's 50 or 55 Willard Mullen originals. And then I went after all of his stuff in terms of covers that he did and books that he illustrated and stuff like that. And now I have the largest collection of his stuff, I think, in the U.S. Then the big thing that hit was in 2004, I had bought a collection, Art Wood's collection. Art Wood is a gentleman who, a combination of gift and purchase, donated his 36 or 37,000 piece original cartoon collection to the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress didn't want his books, so I bought his books. And with buying the books, there was a whole bunch of stuff that I got from that I expanded out. It was like, oh, he had a bunch of stuff with cartooning courses. It was like, oh, I'll go collect cartooning courses, okay? So there were all these different threads. So I bought Art's collection, and by the time I got it, I basically had 100 boxes of books, most probably 50 boxes of books in the basement that were duplicates. And there was a local bookstore that I would go to that I told the gentleman I had these dupes, I don't know what to do with them, and this guy calls me out of nowhere he was in town from the Netherlands, and would he meet me? I met him. He bought all these books. It winds up he collected World War I and World War II material. I went over to visit him. And I walk into his room, and let me tell you, okay, what a mindfuck of a room that guy's got. He had, and still has, arguably the finest collection of World War I and World War II political cartoon magazines and books from Europe anywhere in the world. And so what I would do is I'd go over there and I'd go, oh, can you find, so I was cherry picking. Okay, I went through his collection. It was like, oh, wow, this is really great art. I want this, or wow, I want that. And he would go and find it for me. And then I had American stuff that he needed. Like over there, they didn't know about Cartoons Magazine, which was 1912, 1922. Every month this pulp came out, which, like that format, that was all about cartooning in America, political cartoons, with all this background on Rube Goldberg and Sidney Smith and all the guys that were running around at that time. And I traded him a bunch of that duplicate material for World War I, World War II, and I went off into that direction. Okay, so and then I had gotten early on. I said something about getting some Spirit tabloid pages.
Yeah.
Well, then what happened was that Steve Jeppe, this is about 7 or 8 years ago, he got into some legal issues and he had to sell a bunch of stuff. And he started selling Sunday pages out of his collection. And so what did I do? I bought like 6 straight years of Gasoline Alley.
Did that come from Geppe's collection?
This is from Geppe's collection.
And we should say that Steve Geppe is the guy who runs Diamond.
Runs Diamond. Really nice guy. Okay, really, really nice guy. It was an honor to get this material. I then with my World War II book. Okay, see, World War II book is always going to be easy. Go to Ohio State. They've got everything. Leaf through. Get what you need. Leave. Except that their Sunday page collections stop about 1932. All right, so they didn't have a lot of stuff from the war years. So,
what the heck is Bill Blackbird thinking, man?
Well, he thought that everything went downhill, but there's a special thing about anybody who's read the book, World War II was this total, just put the United States society into a mix master and turn it on high and frappe for about 20 minutes. Okay, it just got all scrambled. So I started collecting, going out to see. It was 20 years too late. What I could collect in terms of Sunday pages, and complete Sunday sections from World War II. So now I've got 150 or 200 complete Sunday sections, because you have to have the context of the ads.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on in there, buying war bonds and vegetable gardens and victory gardens and scrap drives and all this other kind of stuff that aren't necessarily just in the comics. They're in the ads. They're in these little promo things at the bottom of the pages. So I went off and started doing that stuff as if I didn't have other stuff to go ahead and collect. So that kind of, in I guess 10 minutes, kind of condenses down what that journey was, going from here to there. Okay. Now in the meantime, I live maybe about a 10-minute walk from where SPX used to be held in downtown Bethesda. So I went to my first SPX, I think it was 1998. Okay. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I still have, there's Keith Knight. I didn't know who he was. I was like, wow, this looks cool. And I get it. So I still have, hey, thanks a lot, Keith Knight, 1998 SPX, okay? So I then got into that world and started looking into what the mini comics and the indie comics scene was offering. And, going and collecting as I went along there. There were people that I regret missing because I was in the corporate world. And I had this conversation with Groth and Katrin, actually, too, at dinner one night, that because of my corporate job, I missed Charles Burns, and I missed a lot of Klaus, and I missed a lot of Chris Ware. There was a lot of stuff that I missed, okay, because I didn't have the bandwidth to absorb it. I was I was off doing this totally other gig, okay, and so I've gone back to try to make amends. In fact, I actually donated some stuff from my collection to the Library of Congress because they didn't have any real holdings in outside of maybe one or two pieces of original art, but they didn't have any Chris Ware posters there. They didn't have a Dan Klaus poster there. They didn't have a Charles Burns. They didn't have any of that stuff. So I'm filling in. I've started to fill in their holes, and more of my collection will get there eventually to help that.
So, Warren, I have some questions, sort of as
Sure.
a collector and the collector mentality, and I'm not sure the best way to phrase this. But I wonder
Yeah.
I wonder about the culture around collecting, because I have it too. We're sitting here
Yeah,
with
sure.
kids' long boxes. It's something I see in a lot of other cartoonists.
Yeah.
But I wonder about the compulsion behind collecting, the value of collecting, the social component of collecting. Any of this stuff, if you think about it, what has driven you, what has been, a positive out of it.
Well,
Any reflections on?
Yeah, and on that, first of all, I want to pay you a compliment on going out and getting all those long boxes of the obscure comics of the 70s and 80s, okay? That people don't understand, and this is one of the reasons why I started the SPX collection at the Library of Congress. People don't understand how ephemeral this stuff is, okay? And that if someone is not there to gather it up, it will disappear, okay? And so these entire records of these not only just people but publishers too, can just be washed away. So there's a certain amount of it to me that I am helping to preserve the history of the entire culture, okay? And I've had enough people come to my house now that, and I didn't really recognize it until almost probably 6 or 7 years ago when SPX special guests would come over, that I have put together something that's significant, okay? So even though a lot don't think the way I do, I think that there are some areas where I believe that I am doing an act of time immemorial preservation, okay? On completely 180 degrees to that, my somewhat humorous view of it is that men aren't allowed to hunt and gather anymore, okay? And so this is a very weak replacement for going out with a bow and arrow and shooting a deer and hauling it home so that you can feed your family, okay? Collecting is, you get to meet some nice people, there are some really weird people out there. Okay, don't. All right.
I don't think that's limited to collecting.
Right. No. But there is a because once when you're collecting as big as this, you have to interact with the fields of the antiquarian book collectors and with the comic book dealers. Okay. And so there is a fair amount of idiosyncrasy just within collecting itself. Although the one thing it does do is if you have a collection that's been recognized, it opens doors to certain classes that you wouldn't necessarily get a door open to. And I've been lucky. I met this gentleman up in Boston that I got invited to these old Back Bay Boston Protestant clubs. Okay, they're not what they were 30, 40 years ago, where you couldn't be this group or that group to get in. But these are old money clubs that it was a real honor and privilege. So I was asked to do a presentation with him at one of his clubs, and he's taken me to dinner and introduced me to all these different people at these very exclusive clubs up in Boston. Okay, I would have never gotten that kind of opportunity if I didn't have the quality and level of a collection where people go, oh, so it does open doors. You do have to contend with, and there are very nice people, very idiosyncratic people, both on the antiquarian book side and on the comic dealer side. Okay, so the bad part about, particularly with my collection, that I find is that where do I dedicate limited financial resources? Okay.
Do you specialize? Like, would you say that you have a specialty?
Well, World War II is definitely one of my big specialties. I don't know how much more I'm going to be getting over the years because that stuff's starting to disappear very quickly, and the stuff that's coming up. Like, for instance, I would love to get a great Alex Schomburg Marvel Tales cover, okay, Marvel Mystery cover. Holy crap! Those, I don't want to spend $1,000 on a VG copy. That I'm past that. Okay. In fact, I was talking with some collector friends of mine who I said to them, I says, I don't want to spend. It's got to be It's got to be something that I would regret my life not doing for me to spend $1,000 anymore. Now, some of my friends will go up to $6,000-$7,000 and even more than that. I know people who collect American illustration art that their budgets are far larger than that. But every man's got his thing. So in terms, especially, World War II is one of the specialties. Like I said, it's a very special time and place. Okay, that'll never be repeated again, and it's fascinating to look at all the different material that came out, the comic books, the comic strips, and everything like that. So that's one of them. I also collect Willard Mullen stuff, but his stuff's getting, I've got so much of his material, it's very difficult for me to turn stuff up. I want to get some more into some of this newsprint stuff that's come along in the indie comics world.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, one of the things I did donate to the Library of Congress. Paper Rodeo, yes, that came out up at RISD. Well, this is going back to one of the Comic Arts Brooklyns that Dan Nadell held. Well, he had a big box behind his table, and he had all these Paper Rodeos. I go, "What do you got there?" He says, "Oh, this Paper Rodeo." I says, "Oh, I'll take one of however many you've got." And so we had 15 of the 19 issues as it wound up. And fast forward a decade later, those things are impossible to find. You cannot find them. And so I decided that the best place for them to be is the Library of Congress, because they didn't. The only intact copy, intact set, is at RISD. No other institution has an intact set. And as a matter of fact, now the Library of Congress has the second most intact set in the United States. And that stuff was just gorgeous. Okay, they did some double-page spreads across the front and back cover, and so I'm trying to get some more of that material into my collection. I think that newsprint stuff is very important.
It's interesting. I like your perspective on collecting. I think we take for granted as an outsider who may come across your book on World War II cartooning. We take it for granted that this stuff exists and somebody has it and records of it. but history is very fragile. It's interesting to note whenever you go to the Billy Ireland and you see like the pages stop at 1932 or something.
Yes, yeah.
That's a really interesting thing to hear you say. It's not something I had considered until you said it just now, just how fragile some of these pieces of history are. So that's fascinating, and I mean that's kind of the history of comics with fanzines, and for a long time comics were just discarded. So you had fans that maintained that history.
Well, and on exactly that point, I had someone who shall remain nameless come over to my house, okay, and they're a big Jack Kirby author. And don't get me wrong, I love Jack Kirby.
Okay, that narrows it down to 2 or 3 people.
So they come into my library, and I say, and I didn't know this about this person, okay, up until after I made this statement. I said, and he was like, wow, he's looking up and down my library, okay. And I go, yeah, there are all these stories here about all these cartoonists and all this work that was done, all right? And people are still writing more stuff about Jack Kirby, okay? And then the person next to me sheepishly goes, oh, yeah, well, that's my next article. It's Jack Kirby. So I didn't know that. I have, well, as a matter of fact, on exactly that point, one of the other collections I've got is the Midwestern School of Cartooning. So I've got a lot of Ding Darling, a lot of Gar Williams, a lot of John T. McCutcheon. So I love all. I may have the best Gar Williams collection in the U. I don't know what not in terms of originals, but in terms of preserving his tear sheets and other stuff. I most probably have the best one of his stuff. So there's a pocket. Who the hell knows who he is? He was amazing. Okay, he was a great cartoonist. Died in 1935. So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I preempted you.
Well, you brought up the alternative indie newsprint stuff, paper rad, whatever.
Yeah.
You curated an art show.
Yes, I am at Anne Arundel Community College in August. I'm going to do an art show about the history of comics on newsprint. Okay, and so I'm going to start. I actually found I was shocked. I went out to the Windy City Pulp Convention, and oh, by the way, it's bad when I bring down the average age in the room. Okay, all right, that's how bad it was. All right, and by the way, and the pulps is we can get into that later. So there, someone had a couple of the sections of the Chicago Inter-Ocean of their color comics. Now, the Chicago Inter-Ocean was the very first paper in the United States to have a color printing press for newsprint. Okay, and it was their printing press, and it was their starting to do Art Young and Thomas Nast cartoons in color on the back and front of this section that got the attention of Hearst and Pulitzer, and they went out and got theirs.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to take it, from there, because now I have an example of that. I'll put a little Nemo up and do other stuff, but I'm going to also bring in a lot of stuff from Smoke Signals and Magic Bullet. I've got stuff that...
tell us about the Alt Weekly stuff that you've been scooping up and curating.
Well, the Alt Weekly stuff, what was that? 2015, I curated a show of the history of comics in the Alt Weekly world, which, now there's a place that's truly ephemeral because most of those, no one even bothered to microfilm them.
That's why it was fascinating to see the Gothic Blimp works and the Yarrow stocks
Right.
and stuff.
Right, yeah, because most of that stuff has not been, because normally the libraries would programmatically microfilm the newspapers. Now, there's arguments about microfilming and what it does to the original thing, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole another argument for another time. So on the Alt Weekly stuff, there was this, there were comic strips and there were comic books, and these are in terms of genesis points of very key parts of comics culture. To me, the third great one was the Alt Weekly comics, starting in the late 70s, early 80s with the arrival of Mac Groening and Linda Barry. Okay, now there were people who worked in between the underground people in the 60s until they came along. Dennis Kitchen did a ton of great work at these really obscure Alt Weekly papers up in Wisconsin. Bill Griffith did a ton of stuff. Okay, so there was stuff going on, but there were a couple of different dynamics that occurred in the late 70s and early 80s, and there was an explosion of Alt Weeklies that were very different in tone and content to the underground papers. For instance, the New York Press, the guy who was the art director of the New York Press went to Art Spiegelman and said, who do you think I should get to put into, okay, Out in Seattle, the people who ran The Stranger, James Sturm, went to Fantagraphics. Who do you know? So there was this other genesis point that came in the history of comics, because if you don't have the alt weeklies, all right, if Matt Groening had not done Life in Hell in the LA alt weeklies, he would have not been discovered by James Brooks and those people to do The Simpsons. It's that elegantly simple, okay? You then bring Linda Barry in, Chris Ware, okay, Charles Burns' Big Baby. You've got all the great political cartoonists, all right? You've got Jen Sorensen, you've got Matt Bors, you've got Keith Knight now. You know where Keith is right now? Keith's out in L.A., okay, working on the pilot for a show based on his strip, okay? I'm hoping he gets it. I'm hoping that, they sign like a 50-ep deal and stuff like that. But his genesis point was back there in the alt weeklies. So anyway, back in 2015, I myself and Bill Carnelopoulos, who I was very grateful to work with on this, put together this exhibit that basically traced it. We started with Jules Feiffer, because he was really the first one. And if you think about Jules Feiffer and his impact on comics, and actually what he did and has done as a cartoonist and an author and a screenwriter and things like that, and brought it all the way up and basically wrote this straight line, it was Jules Feiffer, the Underground People, New York Press, okay, and then Tom Tomorrow was in there, Charles Burns, all these people got included, Kaz, everybody was in there. And the show was a huge hit, okay, it really was a huge hit. And it shone a light for those 2 months on this part of the comics world that's extremely important, okay? And yes, one day I'm going to get off my ass and write the book, okay?
That Cartoons for Victory book sitting right there, by you, published by Fantagraphics,
right?
Gary and Mike, essentially.
Yeah.
Most of the material in that book, does it just come from your collection? You said you went to the.
I'm most probably about half the book, maybe, at least half the book came out of my collection. I went to most of the Will Eisner pieces in the back, the posters. 8 of those came from the Library of Congress. In fact, catch this as a story. So I told the Library of Congress, I know a lot of people there, and I went to the head of the department and says, look, I'm working on this book. Can I go in the back and look through the World War II posters? They said, sure, just check with the person who's in charge of the poster section. Did that. Warren, we know you, not a problem. So I go in the back, and there were these big cabinets there that are about that wide, and they were about 5.5 foot tall, about that thick. And I put a big gurney next to it, so I take out one of these big, huge folders, literally about the size of this table, and put it on the gurney, and I open it up, and I go, oh, it's a Will Eisner poster. And I turn it over, and I go, oh, there's another one. And there were over 40 there.
Wow.
All right. And a couple of months after that, I saw Dennis Kitchen, who handles the Eisner estate. I go, Dennis, I'm working on this book. How many posters do you know of? And he goes, I've seen about 6 or 7. I go, Dennis, there's like 40 of them. No one knew they were there because they were deposited back during the war. Okay. And they sat in, and by the way, whether it's the Library of Congress, the Museum of Modern Art, the museum up in Billy Ireland Museum, all of these institutions have stuff that they haven't gotten cataloged yet or they haven't seen for years. And it's no fault nor blame, it's a function of money, okay, and staff time, okay? So, the Library of Congress was very kind to me. They allowed me to go ahead and select 10 to be scanned. And so 8 of the 10 made it into the book. So I went there. I went to the National Archives and went through the archives of the Office of War Information. I went out to San Francisco, and I went to University of California at Berkeley. San Francisco Library had microfilm of the African-American newspaper, the California Eagle. I went down to the Japanese-American Museum in L.A. to go through the Japanese-American newspapers at the time to see what was going, because here were people who were about to be thrown into intern camps. What did they make of this, okay? And so the tragedy was that they had been using syndicated American cartoons. Unlike the African-American newspapers, they were all using their own cartoonists. And to me, this whole world opened up about the difference between the two. Japanese-American wanted to look so American that they basically used syndicated cartoons from NEA Syndicate and stuff like that. The African American ones, they didn't because they wanted their own voice, and they were forced into having their own voice because they were in a segregated world. And man, there were some amazing cartoonists. Ollie Harrington, which, by the way, Billy Ireland Museum just announced a huge trove of Ollie Harrington cartoons that they got from Germany, which is where he died. Jack and a different Jackson. There was Melvin Tapley. And so I ran across 8 or 9 of these really amazing cartoonists who were doing this really hard-hitting work in these newspapers that were only seen by a very small segment of the society. And so that's one of the reasons why that's the biggest, the Jim Crow goes towards the biggest thing in the book. So I did a lot of research going into a lot of different sources. I went to 4 different people's private collections. Once you're known to have a collection, you get to know other people's that have collection. Right. And so I went and did that. So that's how that came about.
Warren, how typical is that kind of research for a book like this? Because we see a lot of comics, we see a lot of collections of historical comics and stuff, and I feel like what you've just described is much more extensive than any of the research I've heard about. Are you comparing notes with other authors, or are you people coming to you for ideas on how to put together a historical book like this?
No, I don't get that. I will get, like, for instance, I've helped Pete Maresca out on his last couple of books. Okay. For the Crazy Quilt book, I wrote a chapter on Frank King. He approached me and says, Warren, in fact, how it started with Pete was, Warren, can you answer a couple of questions about Frank King? And for better or for worse, I answered them correctly. Okay. And he goes, hey, Warren, would you want to write something on Frank King's political cartoon career? And he did have a very extensive, not a very extensive career, but he did some great political cartoons. So I helped out with that, and I've supplied stuff from my collection to, I think it's 25 or 30 books from different people, from Craig Yo to Pete Maresca to Jeet here did one on Claire Briggs and things like that. So I get a couple of those requests every year. What do you have from X? Pete's gonna hopefully start up another book, and he's already asked me, Warren, what do you have about X? I go, well, I've got this, and this. He's like, okay, Warren, all right, fine, okay. So it's in terms of people doing research, Jeet here does a great job doing research. Okay, I am, even though I hated, loathed, and despised the academic world, the one thing I do appreciate is their annotation. Okay, so what is the source of this stuff? Okay, and how good is that source? And one of the criticisms I have about stuff is that a lot of times you read through this, it's like, well, you're making a statement that N million comics were produced during this time frame, but where did that number come from? Okay, are you pulling this out of your butt? I mean, is there a, like I was reading something about World War II in comics, and they cite a number of comic books that were published during that time, and I went in the back and I looked in the index, and I found the source, and I have the book for the source. And so I went to the book, I opened the book up, and they say they report that number, but they don't say where they got the number from. Okay, so it's like, well, okay, I'm confused. All right, so this source, and you see this a lot. Okay, where this source cites this source, and then all of a sudden a Genesis thing occurs, like the Senate subcommittee for on comic books. Do you know the linguistic thing? Everyone calls it the Kayfabe Commission. It's not. All right.
It's not, and I
It's
want to
not.
make note of that because he was there.
He was there. Yes, he was
but
there.
It was not the Keyfelder thing.
That's right.
And so all you Kayfabers who put that in the comments, fuck you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's why your comments don't show up.
Exactly, and I'll forward anybody my article on that. When I wrote a big article on the comic book hearings, because everything that you read it started with the comic book hearings and moved forward. None of my predecessors ever asked the fundamental question, why were there comic book hearings? So I went down. I thought there was. My buddy Jack Morgan goes, Warren, you should write something on the comic book stuff. And I was like, I don't know. There's probably nothing down there. So I got a hold of Groth, and I said to him, I says, look, I'm going to go down. If I don't find anything, I'm not going to write it. But if I find something, I'll let you know. And I went down there, and oh my God, there was this unbelievable stuff that people had just ignored or left out, or purposely went ahead and kept out because they wanted to maintain the view that the comic book hearings were all about the oppression of comic books, and that's what it was all about. It wasn't that simple in any way, shape, or form. Okay, once you go through the history of why they got there. So I found out a whole bunch of stuff that people had not unearthed before, and it lent even more credence to the fact that it was not a commission set up whose sole purpose it was to rake the comic book publishers over the coals. That wasn't it in the least. I can show you a speech given on the floor of the Senate that says as much. And oh, by the way, if you read through the final report that Kayfabe wrote, because the 1952, the Republicans took the Senate. Okay, they took it back. The Democrats took it back in '54. So in April of '54, which is when the comic book hearings were, Kayfabe couldn't be in charge because he was a Democrat. Okay, and by the way, you have to pose the question: well, if you call the Kayfabe Commission, what is it that you don't understand about the way the Senate works? Okay, so so Kayfabe came back in after they won the Senate again. He completed the report. In the report, he said, "I don't think we should censor comics." I'm confused. Okay,
Yeah, a lot of that history, I guess, is bent from the perspective of the publishers who chose to censor comics, right? They were writing the history after they essentially win and put out some of their competition, put them out
right.
of business.
Well, and that was one part, but the other part of it was a better story to show that the comic books were unfairly oppressed by these mean old white guys in the Senate.
Sure.
Okay, and so that trope continues in the face of what really happened. Yeah, okay, the television hearings, Gaines blew it. Kayfabe was there, but people go, well, Kayfabe was running for president. It's like, well, no, the presidential election was in 1956. He was being reelected in all you had to do was look at the history of Kayfabe and you go, oh, he was up for reelection again. Of course he's going to grandstand. Because if he doesn't get reelected, he can't go after the 56, So simple stuff like this, people were not bringing in, and this is one of the other criticisms I've got, people don't bring in the external, they look at comics as this insulated, isolated thing that is not prone to external forces, okay? And it's just not true,
So, Warren, you brought some stuff. Tell us about this Astounding Stories.
All right, well, let me talk about the pulps, okay?
Yes.
So, starting a little before World War I, you started to get something that was not quite a magazine, and it was mainly fiction. It was done on very cheap paper, okay? Mass-produced, 10, 15, 20, 25 cents, however much it was at the time. That started to branch out into different different genres of stories. So, science fiction in the United States got started actually in the equivalent of Popular Mechanics. It was called Electrical Experimenter by Hugo Gernsback, turned into Science and Invention. So he would have these things about the latest radio technologies and stuff like that, and insert a science fiction story in. And he took one of his science and inventions and made it an all-science fiction issue. And I think it was a year or two after that, so in 1926, he launched Amazing Stories, which was the first science fiction pulp or magazine of any kind dedicated just to science fiction. So there is a direct line. Okay, now he didn't originate science fiction. He just went ahead and put it in the format that allowed this explosion to occur. So there's a straight line that goes directly from Hugo Gernsback in the 20s to Star Wars. Okay, you can't get there, and there are other things in that. Anyway, so one of the science fiction magazines that came out, this came out in 1931, was Astounding Stories. Now, H.P. Lovecraft, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, he started doing things for obscure magazines and weird tales in particular in the 1920s. In the 30s, this is right before he passed away, he did The Color Out of Space in Astounding Magazine, and he also did At the Mountains of Madness, a full-length novel. Okay, and so this is the first printing of him on the cover, of his story on the cover of At the Mountains of Madness. He passed away, I think it was 38, and so stuff came out posthumously, And I've got some weird tales. When you come, I'll show you some of the weird tales that came out with the case of Charles Dexter Ward that was published posthumously. But that stuff didn't get on the cover. Okay, so the world of pulps, there was a science fiction world, there was a Western world, there was a detective mystery world, there was a a spicy adventures, lurid world. Okay, and then there was the world of the hero pulps. Okay, and the first of those was the Shadow. All right, then you got Doc Savage, then you got the Spider, and then it was off to the races. Okay, so if you were a kid in 1929 or 1930 and you went to the newsstand, now I'm not talking about going home and seeing the Sunday paper, you went to the newsstand, you saw these amazingly colored covers of all these different genres of this cheap mass-produced fiction. Okay, and a lot of kids back then were like, wow, look at this cover. This looks really cool. And they would go inside and start reading it. Well, if you think about who was growing up at that time, Jack Kirby was born in what, 1917? He's 12 years old in 1929. Okay? Siegel and Schuster, the same thing. They were all born about the same time. And so at the point that they were getting into their teens, okay, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, this stuff, especially the hero pulps, is flooding is just out there on the newsstands, and believe it or not, they read it. Okay, so and the two examples I'll give you, all right, and when you come to my house, I'll show them to you. The October 1938 issue of Doc Savage was The Fortress of Solitude, which was all about Doc Savage's secret place in the Arctic where he kept all of the stuff that he captured from all the super criminals he was dealing with. Where have you heard that before? Okay. The Whisperer. The Whisperer was Chief of Police James Gordon. Okay. You think that Bob Kane pulled that out of his ass? No, I don't think so. Okay, because they were reading this stuff. All right. If you look through the science fiction magazines of the 1930s in particular, and you look at the Frank R. Paul stuff, and the way, and in part influenced by Frankenstein in particular, so if you think of the laboratories, okay, that were going on, and the machines and all of that other stuff, and you bring in the way machines were brought in Metropolis, okay, and the science fiction world took it with Frank R. Paul and Wesolowski and a bunch of these other great people, and they were drawing all this stuff. Well, all these guys, including Kirby, was reading this. Now, he didn't really get into his really great labs and machinery and everything until he started the second Marvel wave, okay? But those years spent reading all of these science fiction magazines and the input that he was getting, okay? I'm not saying that he wasn't original in any way, shape, or form, but those formative years where he was reading those books, it sat in his psyche, okay? So these are important things. Actually, another one I brought right here. This is the very first appearance of Conan the Barbarian on the cover of a pulp. Now there were, yeah, I know it's like he doesn't, of course he's got the babe draped on him, okay, as is appropriate, and there's some evil thing, and I don't think he's holding that knife quite correctly, but yeah, that's him. Okay,
well groomed as well.
Well groomed, right? Definitely not the Arnie Schwarzenegger look that we saw, okay? So there was a lot of stuff. For instance, the Maltese Falcon was first published in Black Mask, okay? Dashiell Hammett was published in pulps. Isaac Asimov was published in pulps. I mean, there were all these people. Ray Bradbury was published, okay? There were all these really famous people. That's where they got their start, okay? So when you look at the history of popular culture, you can't get to where we are today without looking at this genre, okay, and this media format is really the correct term, okay? And I'll show these when you come to my house also. In August 1928, the issue of Amazing had two very important stories in there. One was the very first Buck Rogers story. Buck Rogers didn't start as a comic strip. It started as a story in Amazing magazine, okay? It wasn't until the story was successful that the comic strip appeared. In that same story was a Doc Smith, Skylark of Space, a Doc Smith novel that's acknowledged to be what is now called the first space opera. Now, as it is with the first of anything, there are debates, here and there as to what's actually the first, stuff like that. But it's pretty well acknowledged in the science fiction field that what Doc Smith was doing was allowing people to go ahead and have stories that involved planets and galaxies at war with one another, and politics that spans the cosmos. All right, so that one book, because you can't get to Luke Skywalker without Buck Rogers. Okay, there was no that was a genesis point. Okay, so these things are actually real important to our canon of popular fiction today. All right, and I'm lucky. I've got a bunch of cool stuff. I don't have a great pulp collection, but I've got enough stuff of importance that I decided, I can't collect everything, so I'm just going to pick here and there and see just see how it goes. So when you come, I'll show you more stuff, including the 2 issues of pulps that Jack Kirby and Joe Simon illustrated, which you've seen the look on Ed's face when I showed it to him. He was like, "What?"
Yeah, there's one image that whenever they talk about that period of Kirby's career, they'll include this one image of like the robot kind of running into the sunset or whatever. So as far as I knew, that was the image that he drew for the thing. I didn't know there's 100 drawings.
Right.
And I also didn't know that Marvel was publishing comics at that time as well, because there are ads in there for
Human Torch, right?
Human Torch.
It was Human Torch, right, exactly. So there's this, as particularly with Marvel, there was an intersection, okay, and it's not as big an intersection as historically I would like, but it was there, and.
Can I ask you, did the distribution mechanism for these pulps, is that the exact mechanism that comics used at that time?
Ooh, I really have no idea about whether or not they used the same distributors. I would imagine they did, because it was all newsstand distribution. But I don't have any hard evidence one way or the other.
Yeah,
Now, mind you, on the distributor side, one of the other reasons, this is another thing that people forget, everyone attributes the decline in comics in the 1950s strictly to the Comics Code, okay? Not quite true, all right? Barron's Magazine did an article, I think it was in February 1955, that they cited 2 things. One, there was a big antitrust suit against one of the big comics distributors, okay? And so a lot of the smaller publishers found that they couldn't get their comics distributed. That was the first thing that was happening. And even Barron's remarked in that time that comic book publishers were publishing too many titles for too little rack space. Okay, and so this was a business assessment at contemporary to the time as to, and I'm not dismissing that the Comics Code didn't have any impact, but you can't go ahead and say it was just the Comics Code, because these 2 very fundamental business things were hitting the comics field. So it's once again, all about the context. So yeah, I don't know about whether or not the pulps were distributed through the same channels as the comics. I would imagine they were, but I can't speak to that authoritatively. So
I would add, a third factor to that 1950s comics decline is television, right?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Well, there was that.
It's a lot more competition. We were looking at some of these broadsheets from the 30s, and it's like that was the dominant visual storytelling format.
Yes.
Cut to the 1950s, there's a lot more competition for visual storytelling.
Right. And television alone, because people would plant their kids in front of the TVs and watch Romper Room or Captain Kangaroo or Captain Video. Okay, and they didn't have to go ahead and read the comics or read comic books.
All right, Warren, another job title you have is Executive Director of Small Press Expo, SPX, commonly known as. I think you've been doing that since about 2010, 2011.
The first one I ran was 2011. This will be my ARG 9th one that I've run.
Well, it's an interesting show. We're coming up on a 25th anniversary, so it's
this year's
been
25th
around.
Anniversary. Yes,
it's evolved quite a bit over this time, and I wonder about some of your reflections on that show, how you've shaped it or reshaped it.
Well, it's certainly bigger than it was, and certainly our reputation, particularly over in Europe and through other international countries, has expanded exponentially. All right, so
are you giving us the political answers, man? I see.
No, not in the least.
Does SPX, is that a conscious thing effort on your part? Are you reaching out to these other countries, trying to bring in international cartoons?
Yes, yeah. There were a couple of things I did early on. The first thing I did was it had blown my mind that Roz Chast had never ever been invited to any comics festival whatsoever. And if you look at her aesthetic, she was indie comics. If you look at what she was doing in 1979, you look what the rest of New York was doing in 1979. The aesthetic was it was clear. So I wanted to open up the invite list to New Yorker people. Okay, so it was one thing I did. I also wanted to expand the international presence. And so I got to know publishers from overseas. Like, for instance, I would go into London, and I went to, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, I asked Greg Bennett, I'd go, Greg, I'm going to London, who should I see? And he sent me to No Brow's headquarters, where I met Alex and Sam, and got to know them, all right? And they started bringing people over. And then I met, I forgot who introduced me to a Self-Made Hero. And I went to their headquarters and spoke with Emma and Sam Humphreys, as opposed to Sam Arthur over at No Brow, and got to know them. So part of it was me, and then they would say, oh yeah, Warren, I've got this creator, like Self-Made Hero brought Frederick Peters from Switzerland. Okay, and then D&Q, I love them to death, okay, and we're honored that they come to our show. They were like, how about Ben the Calton board? And I was like, whatever you need from me in terms of writing grants or letters, whatever it is, just let me know. So I made a very conscious decision to get international people in and try to expand out what is indie comics.
Yeah, hearing you talk about your collecting, it makes me think about the way SPX has kind of expanded. And I mean, comics in general, in a lot of ways, I think have followed your own eclectic tastes.
Well,
because I whenever I started reading comics, it was alternative comics,
yeah,
and
sure.
there was like mainstream comics.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And now there are, I don't know, dozens of classifications and subcategories, and I think that those barriers are less in some ways now.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a recent development, the idea that we can put all these different types of cartoonists in a room together.
Right. And also the barriers have come down, creating problems that we have to solve. Because for instance, there are people that come in to SPX that their books are now being published by the big publishers. Well, our floor is dedicated to the small publishers. What do we do? Because these are people who used to be part of SPX and have now gone up the chain. And by the way, like Mr. Pisker, okay, Marvel Comics at SPX, oh my God, okay, I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, those kids will get real salty.
It's like, well, now wait a minute, if Durf is another one. Okay, and these people have gone. Rebecca Sugar last year, okay, came from selling mini comics at SPX to go on to these bigger and better things. And so I'm of the mind that especially people who've come from SPX, I don't care where they wound up and who they work for, I want to bring them back. Okay, I'll be honest with you, I want to basically have them help us pimp the show out. Okay.
Of course.
But here on the Kayfabe networks, man.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Okay. But the other part of it is that I also want people to see that, oh my God, look where Ed started, look where Durf started, look where these people started, and look where they are now. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting show. I've been going there since 2000, on and off, missed a couple years here and there, but you see it evolve, and it's one of the things that excites me is there is a real energy.
Yeah.
Most of these shows have their own identity. I think.
Yeah, sure.
And SPX,
yes.
I include in that. One of those qualities is a certain youthfulness. So you may have Rebecca Sugar on one side sort of being like, this is what, I started there, and look where I'm at now. But that person who it's their first show, it's amazing because it's a big show, relatively a big show. So if you happen to get in through the lottery or something and you're a young cartoonist, it's a pretty mind-blowing experience, and that energy is palpable in the room.
Yeah, and you touch on an interesting subject. People forget that the way you used to get your tables at SPX in quote-unquote the olden days was you would send in a envelope with a check in it, and based on the postmark, That's who got the tables, okay? All right. Now, and there were exceptions, like, for instance, you have to have the publishers, okay? So I can't not have Fantagraphics. I can't not have D&Q. I can't not have Annie, who I will miss greatly because this will be her last year at SPX. So there's most probably about 20, big, considering Fantagraphics and D&Q, down to the small publishers that it's like, well, we got to have you people. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But one of the reasons why we put the lottery in and did not go down a curatorial way is that, and I'm going to give the example of Raina Telgemeier. Okay, Raina used to come to SPX with her handmade mini comics. Would she have gotten into any show with her first handmade mini comics? The answer is, I doubt it. Okay? But look what happened. All right? So we want to go ahead and at least have a part of the show there that those hopeful future Ed Piskers and future Raina Telgemeiers can come and get their first experience and not be judged on with the aesthetics of whoever is doing the selecting. Okay, so we view that, and by the way, I have nothing against curation in any way, shape, or form. That's a tough job, and I admire TCAF and the other shows for doing it, and I think that they do a great job of it. All right. We come from as I explained, we come from a different view of how people get into the show, going back to the postmarks. Okay, so we've maintained that tradition, and we feel that tradition gives these opportunities. And we've had knocks. There have been people have gone up on Twitter once we announced the stuff. Go, oh, that person shouldn't get in, and I should have gotten in, and all this other kind of stuff. And I just scratch my head and I go, well, okay, maybe you should and maybe you shouldn't, but we're giving everybody equal opportunity. Okay, we don't think that we think that everybody should have an equal chance. Okay, and that means not only in terms of their aesthetics, but how long they've been doing it. So,
do you have a wish list of things that you want to see implemented regarding SPX?
A wish list. God.
You talk about early in your tenure wanting to bring over.
Oh, someone to take my job. Okay. How about that for a wish list?
Every year you've had the reins, some like little new piece would be added or refined the entire time from the simple act of getting an ATM system, on the premises.
That was my buddy's idea. My buddy's a real estate lawyer, and he came to SPX. He says, "Warren, this is fantastic, but you can rent ATMs." I'm like, "Really? Okay, sweet." So the next year, I put ATMs at either end of the room. Okay, because look, the one thing that I'm going to admit, right here, running dog capitalist flunky. Okay, I'll admit it. Part of this is that we want to help the indie comics community remain economically viable, okay? And if that reeks of capitalism, I'm sorry for those people that don't like that word, but we are here, part of our purview is to help these people make money. And that's either on the floor or to provide them the opportunity to go ahead and be discovered by, as you know, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, all these people have been sending people to SPX for years, and there must be 25 or 30 people out in LA right now that are SSPSers that are working in the animation industry. Yeah. Okay? I want these people to have viable careers. Okay? So, and that's why we do things like the ATMs. That's why we do things like we had the Nickelodeon sponsorship a couple of years ago. We're going to have a sponsorship with Kickstarter this year that we're going to announce relatively soon. Okay.
Right. Sounds like you just did.
Yeah, right. Now, of course, I haven't given any. I've only said there is one. I didn't say how it manifested itself. Okay, so I'm able to get away with that. So I'm like, and I see the struggles that people go through to go ahead and try to make a career and try to go ahead and make money at this, even just to make the money back. And this is one of the reasons why people have also said, when are you going to go to a bigger venue? Okay, people, I'm going to say it right now. Did the research, all right? Went through the Washington, D.C. area. There are only 3 places in the D.C. area where we can hold SPX where it's one big room. If we go to any of those venues, you can be guaranteed that your room night rate's going to go up $30 or $40 a night, and we're going to have to charge you N% more for each and every one of your tables and charge more to get into the room. I'm not doing that. Okay? Someone wants to take my job and do that? That's fine. One, I'd give them the job, but good luck telling the people, because and one of the things I did when I negotiated the contracts, I negotiated out now to 2022. We've got the same room rate now through 2022. Now think about that,
yeah,
okay?
that's huge.
And it's like $130 a night. We understand that a lot of the people in the indie comics community, especially the newer people coming in, don't have a lot of money, okay? And we're trying to maintain this. People may say, well, you charge too much for tables and you should be charging admission prices. Do you have any idea how much it fucking costs to put this on? Okay? This is like not cheap, okay? So if there was one thing that I wish were to happen, I really wish that there were ways that I could go ahead and either increase the way people make their money or decrease the amount we have to charge to get in the door and to be an exhibitor and to stay at the hotel. Did the research. This is the best we can do.
It's great, and bringing those ATMs on the premises, that was a watershed moment because I was there beforehand, and these old buildings, they are a Faraday cage. The way they're erected.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Your internet signal is not going to penetrate some of these walls. So people use that little card slider and stuff. Plus, everybody's competing with that same internet.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right.
And people had to go 3-4 blocks away to look for a bank, to pay a surcharge, to get a couple dollars out, and then come back. And have the convenience of that, man, it makes the entire process way easier.
Yeah, we're, like I said, part of this is a capitalist enterprise, and I want to see these people make money, okay? It's that elegantly simple. Berate me, all the socialists out there, fine, okay? But
all their parents are lawyers and doctors, too, so don't even sweat it, man.
Yeah, it's a different piece of the capitalist.
Oh my God! What is It just occurred to me. What is my board and my executive committee going to think of this interview? Oh shit! Okay.
I mean, crossed any lines.
There may be an usurper like Game of Thrones, somebody looking for that position, man.
That's true.
They're gonna slip something in that coffee.
Some new applications may come in as you're trying to give this job away.
Look, if I have a preference, okay, I would much rather have some poison from Varys than get knifed by a Valerian steel blade, okay? So if you're out there...
It's on the record now.
Okay, it's on the record now. All right.
Warren, another thing that I think you've done, I don't know if this was set up before you took over, but is the connection between Library of Congress and SPX, whether it's donating books from SPX exhibitors, to be part of a permanent collection.
I'll be arrogant. That was me. Okay.
I think that's a noteworthy feature. I don't know other shows that do something like that exactly. No. And as we talked earlier, preservation, these things are fragile. We shouldn't take them for granted. Being part of a collection at the Library of Congress is noteworthy.
I'll never forget. It was the first year after we had announced it, and I was going around the room, and I forgot who the gentleman was, but he had these really cool mini comics that were packaged. I love the people that put craft into the packaging. The fold-out stuff that people do. Ken Wong's origami comics. I love that stuff. Okay, so I went to so I was sitting in front of his table. And I looked down and go, hey, look, would you be willing to donate a couple of these to the Library of Congress? And he fell back on his chair. He goes, you are kidding me, okay? I mean, his head just exploded, okay, at the thought that we were going to preserve, and I tell people, I go, we want to preserve your works until the sun goes supernova, okay? Would you be willing to do that? It's been a thrill. There's now over 6,000 items in the collection. I think this year we'll top 7,000. And everything that we've got in the collection either A, has never been submitted for copyright to the Library of Congress, or is a rare mini comic, or both. Okay. So, and we also, a couple of years ago, I went to the curators of the prints and posters part of the prints and photographs division, and I now have someone that just comes to just focus on getting prints. Okay, lithographs and signed prints and things like that from other people. So we've expanded out the universe. One of the big ways we get we get stuff into the collection is through the Ignat submissions. We get, oh my God, I want to say it right now, to all of the Ignatz judges in previous years or the ones this year who even I don't know who they are. They keep this from me. I'm in charge. They won't tell me, okay? I can't thank you enough for going through the hundreds. I mean, we've seen this real escalation of people submitting for the Ignatz Awards, okay? And I can't thank all of those people enough for going through all of that material. Well, there are 6 copies. 5 go out to the judges, and we keep a copy of everything. And then we go through all the submissions, and the Library of Congress gets first crack. So anything that they don't have in their collections, that gets donated out of the Ignatz submissions. Okay, then we have people go around the room. All right, so we've got a couple of different ways of bringing stuff in, and a lot of this stuff, we could be the only institution in the United States that has a lot of this material.
On top of that, the relationship with you, SPX, and the Library of Congress, we shouldn't give that short shrift because you have been very crucial with introducing cartoonists and comic book makers into like the National Book Festival.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. The National Book Festival. So I got, this is starting, I guess, around 8 or 9 years ago.
I gave a talk right after Stephen King.
Yeah, right, yeah,
You know what I'm
exactly. Okay, you've seen the look on his face, okay? Well, how about this? Let me tell you how I got there, then I'll tell you, to me, the most amazing moment of doing that. So, I've been a volunteer at the Library of Congress for well over a decade. Most probably about 7 or 8 years ago. They said, "Hey Warren, we want to get some new people into the we want to get some graphic novel people in. Who would you recommend?" And I would sit down with them and do this and do that. And so finally, I did that for like 2 years, and then I went up to the gentleman who was in charge. I says, "Look, I'm doing this. Is there a way we could cut out a deal?" Okay. And I said, "Look, I'll go ahead and help you get people into the because they want the publishers to pay for all the transportation and everything." And I said, "Look, the publishers come through SPX. A lot of them don't have that kind of coin. So let me do this. I'll help you set up the graphic novel pavilion and identify people and stuff like that. SPX will fund up to 3 guests going there in exchange for a full sponsorship." Okay, and the minimum full sponsorship they had was $10,000. And he said, "Fine." Okay, like no ifs, ands, or buts. Now Maria Rana is now she's the one who's in charge of all of the guests that come to the National Book Festival. So I work directly with her now. Okay, fantastic. Love her. Love working with Sarah Cara. There's some just amazing people. So they look at us as very critical to helping them with the graphic novel people that are in the National Book Festival. And we made a change just this past year. It used to be an isolated graphic novel pavilion, but now what we're doing is we're being very conscious in this, is that we want to get as many graphic novel people onto the genre stages. So we want to get one into history. We want to get one, like Jim Adiavani is coming, so he's going to be in the science stage. Okay, Rain is coming. She's going to be on the young adult stage. Okay, so we're going to kind of flip it on its head, but that's going to allow us to bring other people and get them in front of, because graphic novels was in this ghetto, okay, it was in a walled place. Now we're saying that it's part of all of this stuff, okay, and with that we're hoping that we get more people to understand that if you like science or you like history, you should also look at graphic novels, okay. And my fave story was I brought Jean Yang, was it 5 or 6 years ago, and I get an email from Maria Rana, and she goes, "Do you think Jean Yang would want to give a talk?" Now, giving a talk at you were there, okay? So they have a gala on the Friday night before, and there's an hour program where they get 4 kick-ass, really well-known authors to give short 10 to 15 minute talks, and then the Librarian of Congress stands up, and it's big stuff. So I was like, I don't see any reason why not. So I put Marie and Jean, together. Jean speaks, and he was on the same stage as E.L. Doctorow, one of the last appearances by Doctorow before he passed away was at the Library of Congress on the same stage as Jean Yang. So Jean spoke, then E.L. Doctorow, and Jean's speech was unfucking believable. Okay, it was an inspiration point for anybody into comics. Okay. I've got to find it and put it up somewhere that people can see it. And so, I've been doing my best to get, Ed, I've had you there twice now, right? Okay.
Yeah, and you asked me to do that speech thing, but I chickened out.
Right, yeah, no, and by the way, I totally understood why, because that is, you're up there in front of senators. You're up there in front of the head of the line. This is big shit to be up on that stage. Okay,
It would have been my first time ever starting at a position of zero with my equity with the audience. Like, they don't know who I am. When I do a comic book thing, people know who I am, and there's a little bit of self-confidence in there.
Right.
But starting at a position of zero, I've never done that, so I don't want my first one to be in front of a senator.
Yeah, well,
or senators.
And Gene, because he was a teacher, okay, and he'd given talks about comics and stuff like that, he got up there and he just nailed the whole thing. But and by the way, that's right. So this is a scoop. I had gotten Ed the slot to go ahead and be up there, and I totally understood why, because it is a big deal, okay, and you do have to have a certain amount of confidence to get up there and do that, and I didn't blame you, and I totally understood why.
I'm a Public Enemy fan too, man. It was the great Chuck D who said, "Neither party is mine, not the jackass or the elephant."
That's right. So we've been able to, and with the National Book Festival, take these people and elevate them up, okay, to go ahead and, because the National Book Festival, those people that don't know, is the largest book festival in the United States. No one even comes close to, they get 90, 100,000 people coming through that place, all right? And in fact, this year, the big kahuna that's coming is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all right? So, you see, you're on the same stage as that and Raina and all this other kind of stuff. So
and then when you sign, like I was signing next to Newt Gingrich, it's a real head trip, man.
yeah. No, it is, but that's all part of getting graphic novels on an equal playing field with all of the other genres.
You do good work, man.
Okay, and for those that haven't come, they should. And then those that haven't been to the gala, because the gala is unbelievable. All right, man, the food is okay. The food was like, whoa, this is really good. Okay, I'm lucky. I get to go to what I think are two of the best events in the D.C. area. One is the National Book Festival Gala, and the other is the Herblock Awards. Oh my God! I mean, the food at both of them. It's like, and the people you see and. It's unbelievable stuff. So we've got that with the Library of Congress, and we've got the collection with the Library of Congress, and between the two of them, they love us. They really do love us. And oh, by the way, that's right. Before I forget, this September they are going to open up a exhibition on basically the history of comics, and you will actually see an SPX Zippy the Pinhead poster in the same exhibit as George Harriman. Okay? So there's going to be stuff there from SPX and stuff there from, all of their comics collections, but they are going to have SPX stuff out there. And that's important because most people have this segregated view. Oh, well, there's indie comics over there, okay? They don't really count. Who cares about them, all right? They don't make Avengers movies, okay?
I just think about, like, I'm laughing because sometimes patrons don't get the memo, and they will show up in that Superman outfit and
right.
What the heck is this?
Right, exactly.
That's huge, man.
Yeah. So that's coming, and then my newsprint exhibit. So that's going to open, I think, on the Thursday before SPX. That exhibit.
Let's call out some dates if you have them in mind. Like
yes. So let me see. So I'm just trying to remember the calendar. Okay, so the 14th and 15th are SPX. September 14th and 15th. September 12th is when the Library of Congress exhibit is supposed to open up. And by the way, the other thing we do on Friday, September 13th, we don't know who we're getting for this, but we have a lecture, an SPX lecture at the Library of Congress that occurs every Friday before. Okay, Box Brown gave a tremendous one. The guys from Josh O'Neill and those guys came and talked about the Little Nemo book that they put out.
Jim won an Eisner for that one. He designed it.
Yeah. So Heidi McDonald came, Charles Brownstein came, Groth gave a great speech. So we bring somebody in. So that's on the Friday. The Thursday is going to be the opening of the Library of Congress, and the Wednesday at Anne Arundel Community College is going to be opening of my exhibit about the history of newsprint.
Wow.
So
busy week for you.
I'm going to be so fucking tired. Okay.
Let's not forget Monday. Let's not forget Monday.
Oh God, that Monday! Oh shit! Oh no!
You better take some 5-hour energy. We'll bring one or two over.
No. I think I need to find a good Breaking Bad meth dealer. Okay. That's my view of the
Adderall.
world. So.
Adderall is the cartoonist's drug. Or
You
so
know,
I've heard.
when I was young, they didn't have that kind of stuff, and they would have most probably put me on Adderall or whatever it is. And I'm glad they didn't, because I couldn't do what I'm doing now if I'd spent 30 years on that. It would have taken a 15-20% of my energy right out. Okay, just to bring me down, and you can't do that when you're juggling all this shit.
Yeah, you got to be firing.
Yeah, on all cylinders. Yeah.
I think this pretty much wraps it up. All my questions have been answered to this point.
Yeah.
Really? Nothing more? Like, did you or did you not on Friday the 17th kill that person, okay?
This ain't the Kayfabe hearings, man. We're having a good time here. Warren, I want to thank you for your time, man. We're going to be sure to include all the links below this video whenever we post this, man.
All right,
so
great.
People are going to know how to get to SBX. And
Yeah, and let me know what else you need. Should I talk at all about these things? I mean, should I talk about these Sunday pages? Do you want me to do that? Do you have time? If not,
3:13. When do you have to leave?
I got time.
We could do a separate video. So we'll wrap this one up, man. Thanks a lot for your time, Warren.
Look, thanks. I mean, this is an honor. It's like one of the heights of me in comics, and I just hope that people don't kill me for something I said. Okay?